The Arctic wilderness stretched under the silver glow of the northern lights, vast and unforgiving. Jagged ice formations rose like ancient sentinels against the starlit horizon, painting the landscape in ethereal blue. It was the kind of night covert operatives both feared and relied upon: perfect visibility, minimal electronic interference, and enough natural cover to disappear without a trace. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. A sleek black helicopter cut through this pristine silence, its stealth technology rendering it nearly invisible against the night sky. Inside the cockpit, Commander Elena Reeves adjusted her night vision goggles with practiced precision. She wore tactical gear with no identifying markers, her auburn hair secured beneath a specialized helmet. Her expression remained unreadable as she consulted her instruments, betraying nothing of her purpose. 10 miles away, the calm of Fort Arcturus Naval Intelligence Base shattered as alert sirens wailed across the compound. Inside the command center, radar operators tracked the unauthorized aircraft with growing concern. Unidentified aircraft has entered restricted airspace bearing 315 at 3,000 feet, announced the radar technician, voice-clipped and professional. No flight plan filed, no response to initial radio contact. Captain Marcus Daniels strode across the command center, his posture rigid with irritation. At 42, Daniels had built his career on protocol and discipline. His close-cropped silver hair and immaculate uniform projected the image of a man who tolerated no deviations from established rules. Another research team who can't follow simple instructions, he muttered, leaning over the radar screen. How far into the restricted zone? 6 miles and continuing, sir. Speed 180 knots. Heading directly toward the western security perimeter. Daniel's jaw tightened. Unacceptable. Scramble interceptors immediately. This is not a night for trespassers to test our patience. The order rippled through the chain of command. Within minutes, 2 Black Hawk helicopters roared across the tarmac, rotors slicing through the frigid air as they lifted into the Arctic night. Lieutenant Sophia Winters felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as her aircraft rose above the base perimeter. At 31, Sophia was one of the youngest tactical flight leaders at Fort Arcturus. Her exceptional skill in aerial pursuit had earned her the respect of the entire division. She had joined naval intelligence with dreams of becoming the kind of operative who handled the missions that never made it to official briefings. Operatives like the ones in the classified files she wasn't supposed to have accessed during her advanced training. Raptor 1, this is command, came Daniel's voice through her headset. Intercept and identify unauthorized aircraft. Standard protocol. Force compliance if necessary. Copy that, command, Sophia responded, adjusting her course. ETA 3 minutes to intercept. Raptor 2, take wide approach pattern. Her wingmen acknowledged, banking slightly to establish the textbook intercept formation. Sophia kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning for visual contact with their target. Back in the command center, Captain Daniels paced behind the radar operators, checking his watch repeatedly. Have we identified the aircraft yet? Stealth model Raven X-90, sir. Registration shows linked to a shell corporation out of Switzerland. No flight plan filed anywhere in the system. Daniels frowned. Corporate espionage, perhaps. Or something worse. Aircraft is maintaining straight course, sir. No evasive maneuvers. Almost like... The radar operator hesitated. Like what, specialist? Like they want to be intercepted, sir. In the helicopter cockpit, Elena noticed the blips on her radar screen that indicated approaching military aircraft. She checked her watch, right on schedule. Her expression never changed as she maintained her course, adjusting only for minor wind variations. She had flown through far worse than a simple intercept. Sophia spotted the black helicopter first. Visual contact established. Unidentified aircraft at 2 o'clock, proceeding at constant speed and altitude. Initiate contact protocols, ordered Daniels through the radio. Inform them they have entered restricted airspace and must follow your lead immediately. Sophia guided her Black Hawk alongside the smaller aircraft, close enough to make visual contact with the pilot. She was surprised to see a woman at the controls, mid-30s and remarkably calm given the circumstances. Most civilian pilots panicked when intercepted by military aircraft. unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace. This is United States Naval Intelligence. You have entered a no-fly zone. Acknowledge immediately and follow my lead to approved airspace. Elena made eye contact with the Black Hawk pilot and nodded once, acknowledging the message. But instead of banking to follow, she maintained her original heading, checking her instruments with methodical calm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Command. Unidentified pilot has acknowledged visual contact but is not complying with directional instructions, Sophia reported, feeling the first stirrings of concern. This was not the typical response. Repeat warnings and indicate consequences of non-compliance, Daniels ordered, his voice hardening. Display weapon status if necessary. Something was building in the air above the Arctic wilderness, tension that went beyond a simple airspace violation. In her small cockpit, Elena Reeves continued her steady course toward Fort Arcturus, carrying secrets that had been buried for 8 years. The interceptors flanking her were about to discover that some ghosts refused to stay buried. Sophia maneuvered her Black Hawk into a more aggressive posture, ensuring the Raven pilot could see that interception was not optional. She repeated the warning, adding, "Failure to comply will result in forced escort. This is your final warning." Again, Elena nodded but did not alter course. Her hands remained steady on the controls as if she were simply flying a routine mission rather than defying United States military aircraft. Command. Unidentified aircraft still non-responsive to directional commands, Sophia reported, bewilderment creeping into her professional tone. Captain Daniels' patience had reached its limit. The unauthorized aircraft had been in restricted airspace for nearly 15 minutes, ignoring every protocol designed to protect national security. In his mind, this represented everything wrong with civilian aviation, reckless pilots who believed rules didn't apply to them. "Lieutenant, you are authorized to execute Procedure Delta," Daniels commanded. "Bring that aircraft into compliance immediately." Procedure Delta, forcing compliance through tactical positioning. Sophia had trained for this but never implemented it on an actual intercept. She signaled her wingman, and both Black Hawks moved into flanking positions that would allow them to force the Raven to land if necessary. The formation was intimidating, 2 of the military's most advanced tactical helicopters boxing in a single stealth aircraft. Any reasonable pilot would have immediately surrendered control and followed directions. But Elena Reeves was far from reasonable by conventional standards. Lieutenant James Foster had been monitoring the radar since the alert began. Unlike the other operators, Foster had specialized training in signal analysis and had served briefly with cryptographic intelligence before transferring to Fort Arcturus. Something about the Raven's transponder signal nagged at him, a subtle irregularity in the broadcast pattern that most technicians would dismiss as equipment malfunction. "Sir," he called to Captain Daniels, "I'm picking up an unusual pattern in the transponder data." Daniels barely glanced at Foster's station, his attention focused on the intercept operation. "Irrelevant. Focus on the mission." "But, sir, it's cycling through frequencies in a non-standard pattern, almost like—" Foster studied his screen more carefully, running the signal through various recognition algorithms. "Like what, Lieutenant?" Daniels snapped, his frustration mounting. "Like an old naval intelligence identification system, sir. Pre-digital encryption." For the first time, Daniels paused, looking more closely at Foster's screen. The display showed a complex pattern of frequency shifts that seemed almost deliberately structured. "That's impossible. Those systems were decommissioned years ago." "Yes, sir, but I'm running it through the recognition database now." Daniels dismissed the concern with a wave. "Probably interference." "Lieutenant Winters, what is your status?" In the air, Sophia had positioned her Black Hawk directly in the Raven's flight path, a clear signal that proceeding further would be impossible. To her surprise, the unidentified aircraft finally began to bank. Not away from the restricted zone, but in a precise pattern that seemed oddly familiar. "Command, unidentified aircraft is executing some kind of recognition pattern, not complying with escort, but demonstrating unusual flight skills." As Sophia watched, the Raven performed a series of maneuvers that no casual pilot should have been capable of. Minor adjustments in pitch, yaw, and roll that taken together formed a distinct sequence. The precision was extraordinary, like watching a master artisan work with tools that should have been inadequate for such delicate operations. In the command center, Foster's computer suddenly pinged. The recognition software had found a match, and the results made his blood run cold. "Sir, I've got an identification from the pattern analysis," Foster announced, his voice tight with disbelief. "It's coming up as a classified designation, Shadow Valkyrie." The command center fell silent. Radar operators stopped their chatter. Communications personnel paused mid-sentence. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Captain Daniels stared at the screen in complete disbelief. The designation that had appeared was one he'd heard whispered in intelligence briefings, but never seen in active operations. Shadow Valkyrie was a ghost story, a legend from the Black Operations files that most officers assumed was classified fiction. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Run it again." Foster's fingers flew across his keyboard, double-checking every parameter. "System confirmed, sir." Designation: Shadow Valkyrie. Authentication protocols matching historical patterns. Before Daniels could respond, the door to the command center swung open with unusual force. Rear Admiral Victoria Harlow entered, moving with surprising speed for a woman of 65. Though officially assigned to administrative duties, Harlow had decades of field experience that made her a valuable resource for complex situations. "What did you just say?" Harlow demanded, her weathered face suddenly alert with an intensity that made junior officers step back instinctively. Foster swallowed nervously. "Ma'am, the system identified the aircraft's transponder pattern as Shadow Valkyrie." All color drained from Harlow's face. She moved to Foster's station with the focused urgency of a woman who had just heard impossible news. "Where did you get that designation?" "That call sign has been inactive for 8 years. Captain Daniels intervened, irritated by what he saw as an unnecessary interruption. "Admiral, with all due respect, we have an intercept in progress. This unauthorized aircraft has violated restricted airspace and refused to comply with military directives." "The transponder signal, Captain," Harlow insisted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded operations that didn't officially exist. "Where is it coming from?" "The Raven, ma'am," Foster replied. "It's broadcasting on frequencies that haven't been used since the mid-2010s. Harlow pushed past Daniels to the communication station, her movements sharp and decisive. Years of administrative duties seemed to fall away as she assumed the bearing of an active field commander. "Patch me through to the intercept team now." Daniels stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration. "Admiral, this is my operation. That aircraft is unauthorized in restricted airspace and has failed to comply with lawful orders." Harlow turned to face him, and Daniels was struck by the intensity in the older woman's eyes. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Captain. If that truly is Shadow Valkyrie, you need to stand down immediately." "Stand down? That's absurd." Daniels moved to his communication station. "Lieutenant Winters, proceed with Procedure Delta. You are authorized to force landing." But Harlow was faster, grabbing the microphone with the reflexes of someone who had spent decades in crisis situations. "Lieutenant, this is Rear Admiral Harlow. Verify identification protocol Sierra Echo 9. High above Fort Arcturus, Sophia heard the conflicting orders with growing confusion. Protocol demanded she follow her commanding officer's directions, but Admiral Harlow's voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone operating under classified parameters. Copy that, Admiral. Implementing Sierra Echo 9 verification. She switched frequencies to broadcast the verification request to the Raven. What happened next would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman in the stealth aircraft below. In response to Sophia's verification signal, Elena executed a precise series of maneuvers that defied every assumption about civilian aviation. The sleek Raven performed movements that should have been impossible for the aircraft, a complex pattern that spoke of skills developed far beyond any commercial training program. Sophia's breath caught as she recognized the sequence. "Ma'am, the unidentified aircraft is performing the Svalbard weave. I've only seen that in classified training footage. The Svalbard weave, a complex flight pattern developed for special operations pilots operating in Arctic conditions under electronic warfare countermeasures. It had never been taught outside the most elite circles of military aviation, and certainly never to civilian pilots. In the command center, Captain Daniels watched the radar track with growing frustration and confusion. His orderly world of protocols and procedures was colliding with something that existed outside normal military channels. This changes nothing. The aircraft remains in violation of restricted airspace. Lieutenant, you will proceed with forced escort. But Admiral Harlow was already reaching for the emergency communication line, her fingers punching in a code that bypassed normal security protocols. This is Harlow, authorization November Echo 470, priority Omega, she's back. Shadow Valkyrie is in the air. The line connected immediately, indicating the call had triggered the highest-level emergency response systems. On the other end, someone with authority far above Fort Arcturus Naval Intelligence Base was listening. "Delay that order!" Harlow shouted, turning to prevent Daniels from issuing further commands to the intercept team. Daniels attempted to regain control of the situation. "Lieutenant Winters, you will follow my orders. Prepare to engage in 3 minutes." Suddenly, every screen in the command center flickered. Emergency override protocols activated as a new video feed appeared, transmitted through channels that existed above normal military command structures. Admiral Jonathan Blackwood, Naval Intelligence Director, looked out from the main screen, his stern expression making it clear this was not a routine call. "Admiral Harlow, is the identification confirmed?" he demanded without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected national security. "Positive, Admiral. It's her signature pattern. No one else could execute those maneuvers in a civilian aircraft." Captain Daniels stepped into view of the camera, his face tight with controlled anger. "Admiral Blackwood, with all due respect, this is a clear security breach. The aircraft has violated restricted airspace and ignored multiple lawful orders to comply." Admiral Blackwood's gaze shifted to him, and Daniels felt the full weight of his authority. "Captain Daniels, you will stand down immediately. This operation is now classified priority Omega." "With all due respect, Admiral," Daniels protested, his career-long dedication to protocol warring, with the surreal situation unfolding around him. "This is a civilian aircraft in restricted airspace. Protocol clearly states." "Captain," Blackwood cut him off with surgical precision, "this comes directly from the Joint Chiefs. Stand down." He turned his attention to the communications officer. "Broadcast on all channels, abort intercept mission. Escort Shadow Valkyrie to secure landing area. VIP protocol, Omega." The command center erupted in controlled chaos. Younger personnel looked confused while older officers exchanged glances of recognition and concern. Names like Shadow Valkyrie existed in the whispered legends of special operations, stories that were told in classified briefings but never confirmed. In her cockpit high above the Arctic, Sophia heard the new orders with complete disbelief. "Escort Shadow Valkyrie to VIP Protocol Omega." She looked across at the Raven, studying its pilot with new eyes. The auburn-haired woman met her gaze steadily, her expression revealing nothing of the secret she carried. Yet somehow, in that moment of eye contact across the vastness of the night sky, Sophia felt she was in the presence of something extraordinary. This wasn't just a civilian who had wandered into restricted airspace. This was someone whose very existence had triggered emergency protocols at the highest levels of government. "That's Shadow Valkyrie," she whispered to herself, a chill running down her spine despite the warmth of her flight suit. Below them, the Arctic wilderness stretched endlessly toward the horizon, keeping its secrets as it had for millennia. But tonight, one of those secrets was returning from 8 years of exile, carrying knowledge that could shake the foundations of American national security. As the formation adjusted to escort rather than intercept, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever had brought Shadow Valkyrie back from the darkness was significant enough to override every protocol in the book. The northern lights that had seemed so peaceful hours earlier now felt charged with possibility and danger. Somewhere in that sleek black aircraft flew a woman, whose story had been erased from official records, but whose legend lived on in the classified corners of military intelligence. And she was coming home. The command center at Fort Arcturus had transformed from orderly military precision into controlled chaos. Officers rushed between stations while communications personnel struggled to establish secure lines on multiple channels. At the center of this storm stood Admiral Harlow, her weathered face grave as she watched the radar tracking the small Raven now flanked by 2 Blackhawks in escort formation. "I need every non-essential person out of this room now," Admiral Blackwood ordered from the video screen. "Security clearance level Indigo or higher only." Junior officers and support staff quickly evacuated, leaving only senior personnel and those directly involved in the operation. Captain Daniels remained, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and indignation at having his authority superseded by forces he didn't understand. "Admiral, I demand an explanation," Daniels said, stepping forward with the rigid posture of someone whose entire worldview was under assault. "This civilian aircraft has deliberately violated restricted airspace. Protocol dictates." "Protocol is suspended, Captain," Blackwood interrupted sharply. "You're still here because you're the base security commander, but make no mistake, this operation now falls under Naval Intelligence Directorate authority." Admiral Harlow moved to the communication station, with the efficient movements of someone returning to familiar territory. "Lieutenant Winters, confirm escort formation. Guide the Raven to landing pad Sierra 3. Full security protocol. No ground personnel, except authorized list." In the sky above Fort Arcturus, Sophia adjusted her Blackhawk's position, still processing the dramatic shift in mission parameters. The mysterious stealth aircraft now held VIP status, escorted rather than intercepted. Through her canopy, she could see the auburn-haired woman piloting the Raven with extraordinary precision, maintaining perfect formation despite flying in challenging Arctic conditions. "Roger that, Admiral. Escort formation established. ETA to landing pad Sierra 3, 7 minutes. Sophia responded, training overriding her curiosity about the radical change in circumstances. The doors to the command center opened again as Intelligence Officer Commander Rebecca Sullivan entered, carrying a sealed titanium case. At 48, Sullivan moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to handling information that could destabilize governments. Her presence immediately caught Harlow's attention. "You got here quickly," Harlow noted, studying the intelligence officer's expression. Sullivan nodded grimly. "I was already on base when the alert came through. The system is programmed to notify me if certain designations appear." She paused, meeting Harlow's eyes. "Is it confirmed?" "It's her," Harlow said simply. "She's performing maneuvers only she could execute in a civilian aircraft." Daniels looked between the 2 women, his frustration mounting as he realized how much was happening beyond his knowledge. "Would someone please explain what's happening? Who exactly is in that Raven?" Admiral Blackwood's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Captain Daniels, what I'm about to tell you is classified above top secret. 8 years ago, Naval Intelligence had a Special Operations Commander with skills that exceeded anything we'd seen before or since. Her call sign was Shadow Valkyrie. I've never heard of any such program," Daniels replied, his voice betraying his growing unease. "You wouldn't have," Sullivan said, placing her titanium case on the central table. "The program was compartmentalized beyond normal classification levels. Even mentioning its existence was restricted to those with direct operational need to know." Blackwood continued from the screen, his expression growing more serious. "Shadow Valkyrie disappeared 8 years ago after a mission went catastrophically wrong, at least according to official records. Her status has been classified ever since." Lieutenant Foster, still at his radar station, looked up from his instruments. "Sir, the Raven is executing another pattern. It's impossible for that aircraft." On the screen, they watched as the small plane performed a series of maneuvers that defied the physical limitations of civilian aircraft. Each adjustment was minute and precise, pushing the boundaries of what the plane should be capable of without sophisticated military avionics. "That's her confirmation signature," Harlow said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and concern. "Only she could fly like that." Sullivan placed her palm on a biometric scanner embedded in her titanium case. After a moment of electronic verification, the case unlocked with a soft pneumatic hiss. Inside was a single digital tablet and a small metallic device resembling a specialized key. "Admiral requesting permission to access Shadow Valkyrie files," Sullivan said formally. "Permission granted." "Security override Alpha 6 Delta." Sullivan inserted the key into the tablet, then entered a complex sequence of commands that seemed to require both cryptographic knowledge and physical manipulation of the device. The main screen in the command center switched from Admiral Blackwood's feed to a classified file interface. The heading simply read, Operation Frostbite, Shadow Valkyrie, primary asset. A photograph appeared of a younger Elena Reeves in military dress uniform receiving a medal from an admiral whose face was deliberately obscured in the image. Her personnel file listed commendations and skill assessments that seemed almost superhuman, flight performance metrics that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. "This is impossible," Daniels muttered, scanning the performance data displayed on multiple screens. "No pilot could achieve these scores." "She did," Harlow said, her voice carrying the weight of personal knowledge. "I was her commanding officer for 4 years before she was recruited for specialized operations." The screen changed to aerial footage of what appeared to be a combat extraction in Arctic terrain. A small, unmarked aircraft executed impossible maneuvers through heavy electronic countermeasures, landing briefly on what couldn't even be called a landing zone, then taking off again with remarkable speed despite being visibly damaged. "Operation Frostbite," Sullivan narrated as the footage played. 8 years ago, critical intelligence assets were trapped at a remote station. Standard extraction operations were assessed at a 95% casualty rate. Shadow Valkyrie volunteered for a solo extraction mission, Harlow added, her voice holding a note of pride despite her grim expression. "Solo extraction in those conditions?" Daniels asked incredulously. "She made 5 trips under continuous electronic warfare conditions," Harlow explained. "No other pilot would attempt it. Most said it was a suicide mission." The room fell silent as they watched the classified footage of those extraction flights, aircraft performing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics and pilot limitations. As the implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in, one question remained unspoken. If Shadow Valkyrie was this legendary, why had she been erased from all records? And more importantly, what had brought her back after 8 years of silence? The answer to those questions was approaching Fort Arcturus at 180 knots, carrying secrets that would soon reshape everything they thought they knew about national security. Sophia's voice came through the communication system, clear and professional despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Command, we're on final approach to Sierra 3. The Raven is maintaining perfect formation. Request ground security confirmation." "Security teams are in position, Lieutenant," Harlow responded, coordinating the landing with the efficiency of someone who had managed similar operations in the past. "Proceed with landing protocol." As the aircraft descended toward Fort Arcturus, Sullivan continued revealing the classified history that had been buried for 8 years. The file showed a pattern that emerged following Operation Frostbite Elena, uncovering inconsistencies in mission parameters, requesting formal investigations into intelligence failures. She began asking questions about Operation Frostbite, Sullivan explained, manipulating the display to show communication records and incident reports. The intelligence that led to the crisis had significant irregularities. She believed it was an inside job, that someone had deliberately compromised the original mission. "And then she disappeared," Admiral Blackwood said from the main screen, his expression grim with the weight of old decisions. "Official records state she was killed in a training accident," Harlow corrected quietly. "But her body was never recovered. In reality, she went underground after receiving credible threats against her life." Captain Daniels' expression had gradually shifted from indignation to shocked understanding as the scope of the situation became clear. "You're saying a black operations commander who's been presumed dead for 8 years just flew directly into our most restricted airspace?" "The question," came a new voice from the entrance, "is why she didn't simply make contact through official channels." Everyone turned to see Director of National Intelligence Elise Montgomery striding into the command center, flanked by security personnel. Tall and imposing at 60, Montgomery had the bearing of someone accustomed to crisis management at the highest levels of government. "Madam Director," Admiral Blackwood acknowledged from the screen. "I wasn't aware you were en route." "I wasn't until 40 minutes ago," Montgomery replied, her expression serious. When Shadow Valkyrie's signature appeared in the system, it triggered a silent alert. Only 4 people in the government were notified. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the assembled personnel with the calculating look of someone assessing security risks. If she's surfacing now after 8 years of silence, something catastrophic is coming. On the main screen, the radar showed both Black Hawks and the Raven touching down on the isolated landing pad designated Sierra 3. Security teams moved into position, creating a perimeter around the area with military precision. "Patch me through to the landing pad," Montgomery ordered. A new video feed appeared showing the Raven taxiing to a stop. The Blackhawks positioned themselves at either end of the runway, rotors still spinning as a precautionary measure. A small security detail had formed as word spread through the base that someone significant had arrived. The Raven's door opened, and Elena Reeves emerged carrying a weathered tactical backpack. She paused at the side of the aircraft, surveying the assembled personnel with a measured gaze that seemed to catalog every detail. Though dressed in civilian tactical gear, her posture and bearing were unmistakably military. Lieutenant Sophia Winters had climbed down from her Blackhawk and now stood at attention, saluting as Elena approached the security detail. Other personnel followed suit, though none of them could have known exactly who they were honoring. There was something in the moment that demanded respect, a recognition that they were witnessing the return of someone extraordinary. Elena acknowledged the salutes with a subtle nod, her expression remaining composed despite the emotional weight of returning to a world she had been forced to abandon. She walked directly toward the camera that was transmitting to the command center. "Valkyrie secure," she said simply, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had gone too long without using it for official communications. Montgomery leaned toward the microphone. "Confirm secure, Valkyrie. Stand by for escort to Briefing Room Alpha." Turning to the others in the command center, Montgomery's expression was solemn. 8 years ago, I was the Deputy Intelligence Director who received her concerns about Operation Frostbite. I didn't act quickly enough on her information. By the time I realized she was right, she had already gone underground. "What was she right about?" Daniels asked, his earlier frustration replaced by genuine concern. "That there was a network of operatives within our intelligence apparatus working against American interests," Montgomery answered. "She had uncovered evidence during Frostbite that certain crisis situations were being engineered to force military responses, creating geopolitical pressure points that could be exploited by hostile forces. And now she's back," Harlow said, understanding the implications immediately, "which means something similar is happening again." The video feed from the landing pad showed Elena being escorted to a secure vehicle by a detail of the highest-level security personnel available on base. Lieutenant Winters watched from a distance, her expression a mixture of awe and confusion as she tried to process what she had witnessed. "Bring Lieutenant Winters to the briefing as well," Montgomery instructed. "If Elena chose her as escort, there's a reason." As the secure vehicle disappeared toward the classified briefing facilities, the assembled officers began to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple airspace violation. Shadow Valkyrie had returned from exile, and with her came secrets that could reshape their understanding of threats to national security. The Arctic wilderness that had hidden her for 8 years now watched silently as she prepared to reveal why she had emerged from the shadows. Whatever had driven her to risk exposure after so many years of careful concealment was about to change everything. The command center had been transformed into a high-security briefing room, with digital dampening fields activated to prevent any form of electronic surveillance. Elena Reeves sat at the center of the conference table, her tactical backpack placed before her. Though she had been gone for 8 years, her bearing carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded elite operations. She looked remarkably composed for someone who had just ended 8 years of self-imposed exile. Her civilian tactical gear contrasted with the military uniforms surrounding her, yet she dominated the room through sheer presence alone. Director Montgomery entered last, sealing the door behind her with biometric locks. The room fell silent as she approached Elena, and to everyone's surprise, she briefly embraced her. "You were right," Montgomery said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of old regrets. "I should have listened years ago." Elena's expression softened momentarily, revealing a glimpse of the person beneath the professional facade. "We don't have time for regrets, Elise. It's happening again." She opened her backpack with practiced efficiency and removed a secured data drive which she inserted into the room's isolated computer system. The screens around the room illuminated with complex patterns of data, communications intercepts, financial transactions, personnel movements. 4 days ago, a specific pattern of security breaches began across multiple agencies, Elena explained, her voice steady and clinical. It's the same signature I identified before Operation Frostbite. The same people who buried that investigation are active again, operating under different identities and positions. Captain Daniels leaned forward, still struggling to accept the situation but beginning to understand its gravity. How could you possibly know this from outside the system? Because I never left the system, Elena replied, meeting his gaze directly. I just moved to its shadows. For 8 years, I've been monitoring from the outside, tracking patterns that can only be seen when you're not blinded by internal compartmentalization. She manipulated the data display, showing connections between seemingly unrelated events across government agencies. The pattern that emerged was subtle but unmistakable, a coordinated effort spanning multiple departments and classifications. They've been planning this for over a decade, she continued. The goal is the same as before. Engineered crisis points that force specific military responses, creating opportunities for exploitation. What's the target? Montgomery asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer would be significant. Our Arctic Defense Network, Elena said, bringing up a map of early warning systems and defensive installations across the northern border. They've positioned assets to create simultaneous failures across 4 key installations. When those systems fail, emergency protocols will activate that require specialized technical teams to restore functionality. Admiral Harlow understood immediately. Creating opportunities for infiltration. Not just infiltration, Elena corrected. Permanent access. The repair teams have been compromised. Once inside the secure facilities, they'll insert hardware designed to give them backdoor access to the defense network indefinitely. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Control over Arctic defense systems would give hostile operatives unprecedented leverage over American security and strategic capabilities. How long do we have? Admiral Blackwood asked from the video feed that had been maintained throughout the briefing. Elena checked her watch with the precision of someone who had been tracking a countdown for days. 48 hours until the first system failure is triggered. Lieutenant Sophia Winters, who had remained silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. Why come forward now? Why not work through official channels if you had this intelligence? Elena turned to her, studying the young pilot with apparent approval. Because the network includes people in official channels. My return was a test to see who would recognize the patterns, and who would simply follow orders without question. The intercept was deliberate, Sophia realized. I needed to know who could be trusted when the moment came, Elena confirmed. Your recognition of the Svalbard weave was impressive. Few current pilots would have identified it from classified training materials. Director Montgomery stood, moving to the secure communication station. I'll need to brief the president immediately. This takes priority over everything else. There's more, Elena said, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room focus their attention on her. She removed another device from her backpack, a small tablet with encrypted storage. The network responsible for this operation has been embedding assets for nearly 2 decades. Every compromised technician leads to a recruiter, every recruiter to a handler, every handler to someone higher in the organization. She activated the tablet, displaying a complex organizational chart that showed connections reaching into the highest levels of government and military command. This isn't just about stopping an Arctic Defense Network attack, she said, meeting each person's gaze in turn. It's about exposing a network that has been operating within our system since before Operation Frostbite. Many of them occupy positions of significant authority. The chart showed names and positions that made several people in the room visibly uncomfortable. The scope of potential compromise was staggering, reaching into agencies that were supposed to be beyond infiltration. Trust only the personnel on your immediate team, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived 8 years by following that exact principle. Until we can verify the full extent of the network, assume that normal communication channels have been compromised. Montgomery studied the organizational chart with growing alarm. Some of these positions, if they're compromised, it means our response to any crisis could be anticipated and countered. Which is exactly what happened during Operation Frostbite, Elena replied. And it's what they're counting on happening again. She closed the tablet and returned it to her backpack, then stood with the decisive movement of someone transitioning from briefing to action. "I'll need a small team, maximum security clearance, and full operational autonomy." "You'll have whatever you need," Montgomery promised without hesitation. "This operation takes priority over everything else." As the briefing continued, Elena outlined her strategy for countering the impending attacks. Her plan was precise and methodical, revealing a mind that had spent 8 years preparing for this exact moment. She had identified the key vulnerabilities in the defense network and developed countermeasures that could prevent the cascading failures. More importantly, she had devised a way to turn the enemy's operation against them, using their own planned infiltration points as traps to capture the compromised personnel and trace their connections back through the network. Lieutenant Winters, watching this legendary figure calmly plotting to save the country that had abandoned her, felt a mixture of admiration and profound respect. "Why?" she asked during a brief pause in the planning. "After everything that happened, why come back to help?" Elena paused in her preparations, her expression becoming thoughtful. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, revealing something more personal beneath. "Because some missions never end, Lieutenant," she said quietly. "I made a promise to the people we lost in Operation Frostbite. This is part of keeping it." Outside the briefing room windows, the Arctic night had deepened, stars glittering with cold brilliance. Somewhere beyond that darkness, hostile forces were preparing to strike at the heart of American defense infrastructure. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed Shadow Valkyrie was truly dead. As the team prepared to deploy, Elena removed one final item from her backpack. It was a small fabric patch bearing a stylized Valkyrie insignia in midnight blue, her original squadron patch from before the call sign became classified. "This belonged to my original squadron," she said, offering it to Sophia, "before everything became classified and compartmentalized." Sophia accepted it with surprised reverence. "I've studied every record of your operations that wasn't classified. There's nothing like them in the current training materials." "The records don't matter," Elena replied, glancing toward the window where military aircraft could be seen preparing for departure. "The mission does." As they prepared to leave the briefing room, the weight of what lay ahead settled over the small team. They had less than 48 hours to prevent a coordinated attack on critical defense infrastructure, expose a network that had operated in the shadows for decades, and do it all while assuming that their normal support systems might be compromised. But for the first time in 8 years, Shadow Valkyrie was no longer operating alone, and that might make all the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Dawn broke over the Arctic horizon, painting the frozen landscape in shades of pink and gold. At a remote airfield 20 miles from Fort Arcturus, a small team gathered around a specialized tactical aircraft. The past 10 hours had been a whirlwind of preparation. Personnel vetted through channels that bypassed normal security protocols, equipment requisitioned from classified stockpiles, and plans finalized for an operation that officially didn't exist. At the center of this controlled storm stood Elena, now wearing a specialized cold-weather tactical suit that bore no insignia or rank markings. The anonymity seemed fitting for someone who had existed as a ghost for 8 years. She studied a tablet displaying real-time satellite imagery of defense installations across the Arctic Circle, occasionally making notations with the precise, economical movements of someone accustomed to operating under extreme time pressure. Commander Sullivan approached, carrying a secure communications package. Her earlier professional distance had been completely replaced by focused determination, though exhaustion was evident in her posture from the all-night briefings and security preparations. "The encrypted channels you requested are active," she reported. "Direct links to Director Montgomery and Admiral Blackwood, bypassing all standard command structures." "Thank you, Commander," Elena replied without looking up from her tablet. "Has the reconnaissance data from the Northern Point installation come through? Just arriving now?" Lieutenant Winters brought it personally from her pre-dawn surveillance flight. Elena nodded, finally meeting her gaze. Her expression had the focused intensity of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. "Your security protocols are impressive, Commander. You run a tight operation." The compliment, delivered without inflection, nonetheless seemed to ease some of the remaining tension between them. Sullivan straightened slightly. recognizing the professional acknowledgement from someone whose expertise was beyond question. "High praise coming from you, Commander Reeves," she replied. As Sullivan departed to coordinate final security measures, Lieutenant Winters approached carrying a data drive containing the surveillance footage she had captured during her reconnaissance mission. She had been assigned as Elena's primary tactical support for the operation, a role that both honored and terrified her. "Northern Point surveillance complete," Sophia reported with professional precision. "I identified 2 maintenance vehicles with non-standard equipment configurations, exactly as you predicted." Elena took the drive, her expression unchanged despite the confirmation of her worst fears. "Show me." Together they reviewed the footage Sophia had captured during her carefully planned surveillance flight. The images showed maintenance crews preparing for what appeared to be routine work at key defensive installations. To an untrained observer, nothing would have seemed amiss. "There," Elena said, freezing a frame and zooming in on a technician's equipment case. "The secondary compartment, standard repair kits, don't have that configuration." Sophia studied the image, noting details she would never have caught without guidance. "I would never have identified that as suspicious." "You weren't trained to," Elena replied simply, "but you identified the vehicles without any guidance. That shows exceptional situational awareness." The subtle praise meant more to Sophia than she expected. Few operatives earned recognition from someone with Elena's legendary reputation. "Permission to ask a question, Commander?" Sophia said, using the formal address despite their growing familiarity. Elena glanced up, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "We're about to conduct an off-books counterintelligence operation. I think we can dispense with some formalities. How did you survive for 8 years completely off the grid? Even with your skills, the resources required would be enormous." For a moment, it seemed Elena might not answer. She continued reviewing the surveillance data, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Just as Sophia had decided the question would be ignored, Elena spoke. "I was never completely off the grid," she said quietly. "I created a network of identities before I disappeared, established secure communication protocols with trusted contacts. Admiral Harlow was one of them." Sophia's surprise must have shown on her face. The implications of maintaining contact with active military personnel while officially dead were staggering. "Harlow kept me informed about personnel changes, security upgrades, potential allies," Elena continued. "And I had financial resources prepared. When you're the commander who runs Black Operations missions, you learn which foreign accounts won't be monitored." Before Sophia could process this information fully, Admiral Harlow herself approached. At 65, she moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had endured more than its share of field operations, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. "The team is assembled," she announced. "All personnel have been briefed on their need-to-know parameters." Elena nodded. "And the original Frostbite files?" "Secured in the aircraft safe as requested." Intelligence Officer Sullivan rejoined them, completing the small circle of senior personnel who would coordinate the operation. "We've identified the infiltration points at all 4 installations. If your timeline is correct, we have less than 36 hours before the first station is compromised." "The timeline is correct," Elena said with quiet certainty that brooked no argument. "They'll move against the Northern Point installation first, creating a cascade failure that will trigger emergency protocols. When security escorts have deployed to protect repair teams, the compromised technicians will access the main control systems." She pulled up a detailed schematic on the main display showing the interconnected vulnerabilities that had been carefully mapped over months of preparation. "We'll deploy 3 teams. Commander Sullivan will coordinate from here with Director Montgomery. Admiral Harlow will take Team 2 to the Central Nexus in Alaska. Lieutenant Winters and I will personally secure the Northern Point installation." Harlow's expression showed concern. "You're going into the field yourself?" "I spent 8 years preparing for this moment," Elena replied, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "I didn't come back to coordinate from the sidelines." Director Montgomery's voice came through the secure communication system, transmitted through encrypted channels that bypassed all normal military communications. "All teams be advised. Presidential authorization confirmed. This operation now has Omega-level priority. All necessary resources are at your disposal." Elena acknowledged the message, then addressed the assembled team with the authority of someone who had commanded operations that existed beyond official recognition. This isn't just about stopping a defense network attack. It's about exposing a hostile network that has operated within our systems for nearly 2 decades. Many of them occupy positions of significant authority. She paused, letting the implications sink in before delivering her final instruction. Trust only the personnel on your immediate team. The small group dispersed to their assigned positions, each carrying the weight of knowledge that could reshape American national security. Sophia followed Elena toward the waiting aircraft, a modified tactical transport with enhanced stealth capabilities that would allow them to approach their target without detection. "Lieutenant," Elena said as they walked across the tarmac, "I reviewed your service record last night. Your instincts in the field are exceptional. That's why you're on point for this mission." "Thank you, ma'am," Sophia replied, caught off guard by the unexpected commendation from someone whose approval meant everything in intelligence circles. "When we reach Northern Point, we'll be operating against hostiles who may have legitimate credentials and security clearance," Elena continued. "Your ability to identify anomalous behavior could make the difference between success and catastrophic failure." They boarded the aircraft, moving directly to the cockpit where sophisticated avionics awaited. Though Elena outranked her, Sophia was surprised when the older woman took the co-pilot's seat. "You'll be pilot in command," Elena explained, noting Sophia's confusion. "I need to coordinate the operation during flight. Besides, you're more current on this aircraft." As they completed pre-flight checks with the efficiency of experienced professionals, Sophia couldn't help but ask the question that had been burning in her mind since the previous day's revelations. "Why did you choose to return now? After 8 years of successful concealment, why risk exposure?" Elena was silent for several moments, her hands moving automatically through the startup sequence while she considered her response. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Sophia had yet heard it. "Because some missions transcend personal safety, Lieutenant. The people we serve will never know our names or what we sacrificed, but they deserve our best effort regardless. That's the burden of operating in the shadows. You do what's necessary, not what's safe." The engines roared to life, drowning out any possibility of further conversation as they prepared for takeoff. But in that moment of shared understanding, Sophia realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the return of a legendary commander, but the embodiment of a principle that had guided elite operatives throughout history: the mission before self. As their aircraft lifted into the clear morning sky, carrying them toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of American defense capabilities, both women understood that they were flying into history. The only question was whether they would emerge as heroes or casualties in a war that most people didn't even know was being fought. 3 hours later, their aircraft touched down at a remote landing zone 15 miles from the Northern Point defense installation. The facility loomed on the horizon, like a fortress of steel and concrete, its importance to the regional defense network making it a perfect target for the kind of sophisticated attack Elena had predicted. A nondescript snow vehicle awaited them, arranged through channels that bypassed standard military logistics. As they drove toward the facility, Elena briefed Sophia on the final details of their approach. "The compromised technicians believe their operation is undetected," she explained, studying real-time intelligence feeds on a secure tablet. "We'll use that assumption against them. Our credentials identify us as security compliance auditors from the Department of Defense. Won't they verify our identities?" Sophia asked, noting the sophisticated security measures surrounding the installation. "The credentials are genuine," Elena replied. "Director Montgomery arranged them personally through compartmented channels. If they run background checks, the system will confirm our covers." The defense installation appeared before them, a sprawling complex of radar arrays, communication towers, and hardened bunkers surrounded by multiple layers of security fencing. 2 maintenance vehicles were parked near the main entrance, the same vehicles Sophia had identified during her reconnaissance flight. At the security checkpoint, Elena presented their credentials with casual confidence that suggested years of experience in covert operations. The guard scrutinized them carefully before making a call to verify their arrival. After a brief conversation that seemed to satisfy security protocols, he waved them through. "Unscheduled audit," he explained to his colleague. "Department of Defense is checking security compliance protocols." Inside the facility, Elena and Sophia were directed to the main control center by personnel, who seemed genuinely surprised by their arrival. They moved with purposeful efficiency, noting the positions of security cameras, personnel locations, and potential exit routes. As they passed a maintenance team working on a critical communications array, Elena murmured quietly, "Second technician from the right." The case at his feet contains more than repair equipment. Sophia observed without appearing to stare, noting subtle differences in the man's equipment and behavior that set him apart from his colleagues. "How do we proceed?" "We complete our audit inspection first," Elena replied. "Establish our cover thoroughly, then move against the compromised team simultaneously with Harlow's group at the central nexus." In the control center, they were greeted by the facility director, a stern-looking woman named Colonel Peterson, who seemed annoyed by the unannounced inspection. "We weren't informed of any Department of Defense audit," she complained, reviewing their credentials again with obvious suspicion. "That's rather the point of a security compliance assessment," Elena replied smoothly, her cover identity perfectly maintained. "Real security threats don't schedule appointments." For the next 2 hours, they conducted a meticulous inspection that would have satisfied any legitimate audit requirements. They requested access to security protocols, defense systems, and emergency response procedures, all while Elena made mental notes of irregularities. She observed security cameras with adjusted viewing angles, backup systems with modified access points, communication systems with non-standard installations. Each anomaly painted a picture of systematic preparation for the attack she had predicted. "Everything appears to be in order," Elena finally announced to Colonel Peterson with bureaucratic satisfaction. "We just need to review the maintenance logs for the past week to complete our assessment." As Peterson retrieved the requested documents, Elena received a secure message from Harlow through encrypted channels. "Team 2 in position. Compromise confirmed at Central Nexus. Standing by for synchronized action." "Understood," Elena replied softly into her communications device. "Execute on my mark." She turned to Sophia with a subtle signal that had been prearranged during their flight. 3 minutes. When I give the signal, secure the control center. No one enters or leaves." Colonel Peterson returned with the maintenance logs, still grumbling about bureaucratic oversight and unscheduled inspections. Elena reviewed them with apparent thoroughness while discreetly checking her watch. "Colonel Peterson," she said calmly, "could you explain why Maintenance Team Echo has accessed the primary communications array 4 times this week, when standard protocols require only monthly inspections?" Peterson frowned, leaning over to examine the log with genuine confusion. "That can't be right. Let me see those numbers again." As she bent closer to study the documents, Elena smoothly removed a small electronic device from her pocket and placed it beneath the main control console. The device would override security systems and broadcast emergency alerts to coordinate with the other teams. "Actually, Colonel Peterson," Elena said, straightening with a subtle but complete change in demeanor from bureaucratic inspector to military commander, "I think we need to discuss a more urgent matter. This facility has been compromised. As of this moment, I am assuming operational control under federal emergency powers." Peterson stared at her in complete confusion, her mind struggling to process the dramatic shift in circumstances. "What are you talking about? You can't just—" "Lieutenant," Elena said calmly, using Sophia's military rank for the first time since they had arrived. Sophia moved with practiced efficiency, securing the control center doors and positioning herself to monitor both entrances. Her training took over completely, transforming her from audit assistant to military operator in seconds. Outside the control center, alarms began to sound as Admiral Harlow's team executed their synchronized operation at the central nexus. The carefully coordinated response that Elena had planned was unfolding exactly as designed. "What's happening?" Peterson demanded, her face paling as she realized the situation had moved far beyond her understanding. "Your maintenance teams include infiltrators planning to sabotage the Arctic Defense Network," Elena explained, activating the device she had placed under the console. Screens around the room suddenly displayed live feeds of the maintenance team now being surrounded by security personnel responding to automated alerts. "That's impossible," Peterson protested, gesturing toward the security monitors. "Those teams have worked here for years. They all have security clearance and background checks." "Yes," Elena agreed grimly. "That's precisely the problem." Over the next 30 minutes, security teams coordinated by Harlow and Sullivan apprehended the compromised technicians across all 4 installations simultaneously. The sabotage devices, disguised as legitimate maintenance equipment, were secured and isolated for detailed analysis. In the aftermath, as federal agents arrived to take custody of the suspects and secure the evidence, Elena stood apart from the controlled chaos, watching the operation conclude with the same calm focus she had maintained throughout. Sophia joined her, still processing the events that had unfolded with startling efficiency. "We stopped them." This time, Elena replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that victories in covert operations were often temporary. But they've been embedding operatives for years. This was just one operation of many. "What happens now?" Sophia asked, watching as the suspects were led away in restraints. "Now we follow the connections," Elena said, her eyes tracking the federal agents who were already beginning the complex process of unraveling the network. "Every compromised technician leads to a recruiter. Every recruiter leads to a handler. Every handler leads to someone higher in the organization." She turned to meet Sophia's gaze directly. "It's why I came back. This isn't a single mission that ends with arrests and congratulations. It's a campaign that may take years to complete." The secure interrogation facility beneath the Pentagon hummed with activity as teams of analysts processed the intelligence gathered from the 4 Arctic installations. 3 days had passed since the coordinated operation, and already the network Elena had uncovered was beginning to unravel. In the central command room, illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens, Elena stood before a digital wall displaying an evolving web of connections. Each compromised technician had led to handlers, each handler to coordinators, each coordinator to someone higher in the organization. The pattern was emerging with devastating clarity. Director Montgomery entered, her face showing the strain of continuous briefings with the President and Joint Chiefs. "The arrests have begun," she announced to the assembled team. 27 operatives identified across 12 agencies so far. Elena nodded without turning from the display. "It's only the beginning. The deeper connections remain hidden." She manipulated the digital interface, highlighting a particular cluster of data points. "These financial transactions connect to shell companies that shouldn't exist. Someone with extraordinary access is protecting them from normal oversight." Admiral Harlow studied the pattern with growing concern. "You're suggesting someone at the cabinet level." "Or higher," Elena replied quietly. "The infiltration is more extensive than I originally believed." The room fell silent as the implications settled over the team. They weren't just facing isolated security breaches, but a systematic compromise of American intelligence infrastructure that reached to the highest levels. Sophia approached with a tablet displaying new analysis results. In the days since the Arctic operation, she had been reassigned as Elena's permanent liaison, a position that recognized her unique ability to translate between Shadow Valkyrie's unconventional methods and traditional military protocols. "The encryption pattern from the sabotage devices matches systems used by 3 different nations," she reported. "But there's something wrong with the signature. It's too perfect, almost deliberately obvious." Elena took the tablet, studying the data with narrowed eyes. "It's misdirection. They want us looking at foreign involvement while the domestic network continues operating." She turned to address the entire team, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent years piecing together a complex puzzle that others didn't even know existed. "We've disrupted their Arctic Defense Network operation, but that was only phase 1 of their plan. The next stage will be more sophisticated, designed to make us question our own security protocols." Montgomery moved to the central tactical table. "What exactly are we dealing with, Commander?" Elena's expression hardened with resolve. "A network that's been embedding itself within our systems for nearly 2 decades. They don't represent a foreign power directly. They're opportunists creating strategic vulnerabilities that can be exploited by multiple bidders." She brought up a new display showing a timeline of seemingly unrelated security incidents over the past 15 years. "These aren't random breaches. They're systematic tests of our defensive capabilities, each one providing data for the next incursion." "And Operation Frostbite?" Harlow asked quietly. "Was their first major success," Elena confirmed. "They compromised the intelligence that led to the crisis, then sabotaged the response operation. The goal was to test how effectively they could manipulate our emergency protocols. And now they're targeting the entire Arctic Defense Network," Sullivan added. the implication clear to everyone in the room. Elena nodded. With the ultimate goal of creating a permanent backdoor into our most sensitive systems. If they succeeded, they could sell access to the highest bidder or manipulate strategic decisions during critical confrontations. She turned back to the display, highlighting a particular pattern of connections. But the arrests we've made have disrupted their timeline. They'll be forced to accelerate their remaining operations before we can trace the entire network. Which makes them vulnerable, Sophia realized. Exactly, Elena confirmed. They'll have to take risks they would normally avoid. And that's our opportunity to expose the leadership. She manipulated the display again, bringing up a new set of data points. We've identified unusual communication patterns at the Naval Research Laboratory in Virginia, security protocols being bypassed, specialized equipment being relocated without proper authorization. You believe that's their next target? Montgomery asked. Not their target. Their response, Elena corrected. The lab is developing next-generation quantum encryption protocols. With access to those systems, they could create undetectable backdoors in our most secure networks. She straightened, facing the assembled team with the focused intensity that had made her legendary in intelligence circles. We need to set a trap, make them believe the quantum encryption program is being moved to a more secure facility. They'll have no choice but to intervene. Montgomery studied her for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. You're proposing to deliberately expose classified research as bait. I'm proposing to end this now, Elena replied firmly. Before they can adapt to the disruption we've already caused. We have a narrow window of opportunity while they're off balance. The director turned to Admiral Blackwood, who had been monitoring the briefing via secure video link. Admiral, your assessment? Blackwood's expression was grave but determined. Shadow Valkyrie's operational instincts have proven correct at every stage so far. I recommend proceeding with her proposed countermeasure. Montgomery nodded decisively. Make it happen. Full operational authority, and whatever resources you need. As the team dispersed to prepare for the operation, Sophia remained behind with Elena, studying the complex web of connections that represented years of patient intelligence gathering. 8 years, she said quietly. You tracked all of this while the world thought you were dead. Elena's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the personal cost behind her professional facade. I had no choice. After Frostbite, they made it clear what would happen to anyone who asked too many questions. But you never stopped asking, Sophia observed. Some truths demand to be uncovered, Lieutenant, no matter the personal cost. Elena turned from the display, meeting Sophia's gaze directly. That's the burden of seeing what others miss. You can't unsee it, and you can't walk away from it. For the first time, Sophia began to truly understand the woman behind the legend. Not just an exceptional operative, but someone driven by an uncompromising commitment to truth that transcended personal safety or comfort. The quantum encryption transfer operation will be complex, Elena continued, transitioning seamlessly back to professional focus. We'll need to create a convincing scenario that will force them to act without making our trap obvious. A legitimate security concern that requires immediate relocation, Sophia suggested. Elena nodded approvingly. Exactly. And we'll need a team they can't possibly have compromised. Individuals who weren't even in position when they established their network. New recruits, Sophia realized. Personnel who joined after you disappeared. Precisely. Elena brought up personnel files on a nearby screen. I need you to help identify candidates. Officers with exceptional observational skills, but not enough seniority to have appeared on their radar. As they worked through the selection process, Sophia was struck by Elena's meticulous attention to detail. Every potential team member was evaluated not just for their skills, but for their background connections, training history, and psychological profile. Nothing was left to chance. You've thought of everything, she observed as they finalized the team roster. I've had 8 years to prepare for this moment, Elena replied simply. 8 years to anticipate every counter-move they might make. The operation took shape over the next 12 hours, a carefully choreographed deception that would appear to anyone monitoring Naval Research Laboratory communications as a legitimate emergency response to a security concern. The transfer of quantum encryption prototypes would be conducted with highly visible security, but carefully hidden vulnerabilities, bait that the infiltrators couldn't resist. As dawn broke over the Potomac, Elena stood on the Pentagon's secure helipad, watching as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the capital. Behind her, the operational team prepared for deployment, checking equipment, and reviewing final briefing materials. Sophia joined her, noting the distant expression in the commander's eyes. Second thoughts? Elena shook her head slightly. Reflection. 8 years ago, I stood on a similar helipad, about to depart for Operation Frostbite. I had no idea that mission would force me underground for nearly a decade. And now? Now I understand what few operatives ever truly grasp, that our greatest strength isn't in our tactical capabilities or technological advantages. She turned to face Sophia fully. It's in our ability to maintain our core principles, even when isolated, even when the entire system seems compromised. She gestured toward the team preparing behind them. Those officers trust us to lead them into a dangerous operation because they believe we serve something larger than ourselves. That trust is the foundation of everything we do. Sophia nodded, recognizing the profound truth in Elena's words. It's why you came back, isn't it? Not just to stop this network, but to restore that foundation. The mission never ended, Lieutenant, Elena replied quietly. It just entered a phase one had to complete alone. The operation launched with precision timing, a convoy of armored vehicles departing the Naval Research Laboratory with highly visible security, transporting what appeared to be classified prototype equipment. The communication channels buzzed with carefully crafted messages designed to convince any monitoring systems that a genuine emergency transfer was underway. Elena and Sophia monitored from a mobile command center, tracking both the convoy and the surveillance patterns around it. They didn't have to wait long for a response. Movement at Checkpoint 3, Sullivan reported through the secure channel. 2 maintenance vehicles approaching from the South Access Road. Credentials show Departmental Engineering Services, but the authorization codes were generated less than 20 minutes ago. That's them, Elena confirmed. They're moving faster than anticipated. The network must be more desperate than we realized. She adjusted the tactical display, highlighting approach routes and security positions. Let them proceed to the primary checkpoint. We need to identify everyone involved before we move. The maintenance vehicles passed through the outer security perimeter using the hastily generated credentials, a sign that someone with significant system access was supporting the operation in real time. Facial recognition has a match on the lead vehicle driver, Sullivan reported. Samuel Drake, supposedly a systems engineer with the Department of Energy, but his background verification shows inconsistencies we missed until now. He's not the one we want, Elena responded, her attention focused on the second vehicle. Watch the passenger in Vehicle 2. They'll be coordinating the actual interception. As the vehicles approached the convoy's planned route, Elena's prediction proved accurate. The passenger from the second maintenance truck, a woman in her 40s with the unremarkable appearance of someone designed to blend into any bureaucratic setting, began directing operations with practiced efficiency. That's our primary target, Elena confirmed. Carolyn Hayes, listed as an administrative coordinator with the Defense Logistics Agency. Her official record shows 20 years of exemplary service. But, Sophia prompted. But she doesn't exist, Elena replied. The real Carolyn Hayes died 22 years ago in a car accident in Oregon. Someone created this identity and embedded it so deeply in our systems that it withstood routine background checks. Elena activated her command channel. All units, primary target identified. Prepare to execute containment protocol on my mark. The convoy continued its journey, seemingly unaware of the maintenance vehicles now paralleling its route. At a predetermined checkpoint, the convoy slowed, creating the vulnerability that had been carefully engineered into the operation. The maintenance vehicles accelerated slightly, positioning themselves for intervention. They're moving into position, Sullivan reported. Preparing to initiate their intercept, Elena watched the tactical display with absolute focus, tracking every movement and timing each response. This was the culmination of 8 years of patient intelligence gathering, the opportunity to capture not just operatives but a key coordinator who could lead them to the highest levels of the network. Stand by, she ordered as the maintenance vehicles edged closer to the convoy. Wait until they commit fully to the intercept. Moments later, the maintenance vehicles made their move, accelerating to bracket the convoy's lead security vehicle. From the second maintenance truck, personnel in convincing security uniforms emerged, displaying credentials that would appear legitimate to anyone not specifically briefed on the operation. "Now," Elena commanded. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hidden security teams emerged from within the convoy vehicles. Additional forces that had been tracking from concealed positions converged on the interceptors. Within seconds, the maintenance vehicles were surrounded, their personnel contained by operators who had been specifically selected for this mission. "Primary and secondary targets secured," came the confirmation from the tactical team leader. "No casualties, full containment achieved." Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The first phase of their counter-operation had succeeded perfectly. But the real work was just beginning. "Secure the prisoners and all electronic devices," she ordered. "I want complete communication blackout. No one transmits anything about this operation on standard channels." As the security teams implemented her orders, Elena turned to Sophia. "Phase 2 begins now. The network will realize something has gone wrong when their intercept team fails to report. They'll activate emergency protocols to protect their leadership." "Which is exactly what we want," Sophia understood. "Their emergency responses will reveal connections we couldn't see before." Elena nodded approvingly. "Within the next 6 hours, they'll initiate a cascade of protective measures, communication channel changes, credential revocations, asset relocations. Each of those actions requires authorization from higher levels, creating a trail that leads directly to their leadership," Sophia concluded. "Exactly." Elena brought up a new tactical display showing key government facilities across Washington, D.C. "We've placed monitoring systems at critical access points throughout the capital. When they move, we'll know." The next 4 hours unfolded exactly as Elena had predicted. The network, suddenly discovering that key operatives had been compromised, initiated emergency protocols that rippled through various government systems. Each security measure they took to protect themselves created new data points for Elena's team to analyze. "We're seeing unusual access patterns at the State Department," Sullivan reported. "Someone is purging personnel files from secure servers. The Treasury Department just initiated an unscheduled security audit of their financial tracking systems," another analyst added. "And the Department of Defense has locked down 3 specialized communication networks for maintenance," a third team member reported. Elena absorbed this information with the calm focus of someone seeing a complex plan unfold as anticipated. "They're burning their operational infrastructure, trying to sever connections before we can trace them." She manipulated the central display, correlating the various security actions across departments. "But they're making a critical mistake. All of these emergency protocols require top-level authorization codes." The pattern emerged on the main screen, a web of authorizations and emergency commands, all converging toward a single nexus point within the government's security architecture. "There," Elena said quietly, highlighting a specific pattern of system access. "That's our primary target. Every critical authorization is being routed through a secure terminal in the National Security Council's West Wing office suite." Director Montgomery, who had been monitoring the operation remotely, joined the secure channel. "You're suggesting someone on the National Security Council is coordinating this network?" "Not just someone," Elena replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "Based on the authorization levels required, we're looking at a senior director or higher." The implications hung in the air. Someone with direct access to the most sensitive strategic decisions was compromised. "We need irrefutable evidence before we can move against anyone at that level," Montgomery cautioned. "We already have it," Elena responded, bringing up a new data set on the main display. "I've been tracking these access patterns for years, building a comprehensive profile of their operational security measures. The authorization codes being used right now match the pattern I've documented from previous network activities." She highlighted a specific sequence of system access attempts. "What's more, they're making critical mistakes in their panic, accessing systems in patterns that reveal their identity rather than concealing it." Montgomery's expression grew grave as she absorbed the implications. "How soon can you provide definitive identification?" "We already have it," Elena replied, bringing up a personnel file. "Robert Caldwell, Senior Director for Strategic Planning on the National Security Council. His digital signature is all over these emergency protocols." The file displayed a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, a career intelligence professional with impeccable credentials and a record of service that spanned administrations from both parties. "I need absolute certainty, Commander. Montgomery insisted. Accusations at this level will have extraordinary consequences. I've been building this case for 8 years, Elena replied, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Every piece of evidence has been meticulously documented and independently verified. Caldwell isn't just part of the network. He's been one of its principal architects from the beginning. She brought up a timeline showing Caldwell's career progression alongside key security incidents. He's been positioned at critical junctures during every major compromise of our intelligence systems for the past 2 decades. Not directly involved, but always in a position to influence the response and investigation. Montgomery studied the evidence with growing alarm. How do we proceed? Very carefully, Elena replied. Caldwell has spent decades building his position and influence. He'll have contingency plans and fail-safes designed to protect him even if the network is exposed. She turned to Sophia. This is where your role becomes critical, Lieutenant. We need someone Caldwell has never encountered, someone completely outside his awareness, to make the final approach. Sophia straightened, recognizing the extraordinary responsibility being placed on her shoulders. What's the plan? We create a scenario that forces Caldwell to take direct action, Elena explained. A security situation that requires his personal authorization but contains elements he can't possibly anticipate. She turned back to the tactical display. And then we catch him in the act, with multiple witnesses and irrefutable evidence. As the team began preparations for this final phase of the operation, Elena took Sophia aside for a private briefing. What I'm about to ask you to do carries significant personal risk, she said quietly. Caldwell is not just well-connected, he's ruthless in protecting his position. If he suspects a trap, he won't hesitate to eliminate any threat. Sophia met her gaze steadily. I understand the risks, Commander. Do you? Elena asked, her expression grave. 8 years ago, I made the same confident assertion before Operation Frostbite. I thought I understood what I was facing. I was wrong, and that mistake cost lives and forced me underground for nearly a decade. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, revealing the human cost behind Elena's years of isolation. I don't want that fate for you, Lieutenant. Sophia considered this, recognizing the rare moment of personal concern from the legendary commander. With respect, ma'am, some missions are worth the risk. You taught me that. Elena studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. So I did. She activated a secure tablet, displaying a detailed operational plan. Here's how we're going to catch Robert Caldwell and expose the entire network in one decisive action. As Sophia reviewed the plan, she realized she was looking at a strategy of breathtaking audacity and precision, a fitting culmination to Shadow Valkyrie's 8-year mission. The trap was set, now they just had to execute it flawlessly. The White House glowed in the evening light, its iconic facade projecting an image of stability and power that had endured through generations of American history. Behind this symbol of democratic governance, however, a silent battle was about to reach its climax, a confrontation 8 years in the making. In a secure conference room adjacent to the Situation Room, Lieutenant Sophia Winters adjusted her dress uniform, her nerves betraying the weight of responsibility placed upon her shoulders. Today, she would play a pivotal role in an operation that could reshape American national security for decades to come. You're ready for this, came Elena's calm voice from behind her. Sophia turned to find the commander leaning against the doorframe, now dressed in the formal uniform of naval intelligence, complete with the rank insignia and commendations that had been restored upon her return. The transformation from ghost operative to official commander was striking. I've never briefed the National Security Council before, Sophia admitted. Few lieutenants ever do, Elena acknowledged, but few lieutenants have proven themselves the way you have over the past week. She crossed the room, adjusting Sophia's uniform insignia with the practiced precision of someone who understood the importance of details in high-level operations. Remember, Caldwell will be watching your every move, analyzing every word. He survived for decades by identifying threats before they fully materialize. Sophia nodded, the gravity of the situation settling over her. And our evidence? Is comprehensive and irrefutable, Elena assured her. 8 years of meticulous documentation, independently verified through multiple channels. The case against Caldwell isn't just strong, it's airtight. Director Montgomery entered, accompanied by Admiral Blackwood. Both carried the serious expressions of leaders about to engage in a historic confrontation. "The council is assembling," Montgomery announced. Caldwell arrived 5 minutes ago, showing no signs of suspicion. "He believes this is a routine briefing on the Arctic Defense Network compromise," Blackwood added. "All communication channels are secure and isolated as you requested, Commander." Elena nodded, her expression betraying nothing of the anticipation she must have felt after 8 years of working toward this moment. "Lieutenant Winters will lead the briefing as planned," she confirmed. "I'll remain in the observation room until the signal is given." Montgomery studied Elena with a mixture of admiration and concern. 8 years of exile, and you're willing to stay in the background for the final act. "This was never about recognition," Elena replied simply. "It was always about the mission." She turned to Sophia, her expression softening slightly. "The most important battles are often fought by those whose names never appear in official records. Remember that when you enter that room." With those words, Elena departed for the observation suite, leaving Sophia to make final preparations for the most consequential briefing of her career. The National Security Council chamber radiated power and authority. Around the polished table sat individuals whose decisions shaped global events: cabinet secretaries, military leaders, intelligence directors, and senior advisors to the president. At the far end, Robert Caldwell occupied his position with the comfortable confidence of someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of Washington politics for decades. His silver hair and tailored suit projected an image of distinguished competence, giving no hint of the network he had allegedly constructed within America's most sensitive institutions. Sophia entered with measured steps, the secure briefcase containing her presentation materials handcuffed to her wrist, a security precaution that seemed to surprise no one in a room accustomed to classified information. "Lieutenant Winters," the National Security Advisor acknowledged, "we understand you have new information regarding the Arctic Defense Network compromise." "Yes, sir," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the tension coursing through her. "With your permission, I'll begin the briefing." As she connected her secure tablet to the room's display system, Sophia stole a glance at Caldwell. He watched her with polite interest, showing none of the concern that might be expected from someone whose clandestine network was about to be exposed. The first slides appeared on screen, a straightforward presentation on the compromised technicians discovered at the Arctic installations. Standard information that everyone in the room would have already received through normal briefing channels. "As you're aware," Sophia began, "the infiltration attempt was more sophisticated than initial reports suggested. The compromised personnel had been embedded for years, with credentials and background checks that withstood routine scrutiny." She advanced to the next slide, showing the organizational structure of the intercepted operation. What wasn't included in the preliminary reports was the extent of support these operatives received from within our own systems. Caldwell shifted slightly in his chair, a nearly imperceptible movement that might have gone unnoticed by anyone not specifically watching for it. "Support?" the Secretary of Defense questioned. "What kind of support?" "Real-time intelligence on security protocols, sir," Sophia replied. "Advance warning of verification measures, emergency credential generation, and most concerning, direct access to classified communication channels that should have been completely isolated from external networks." She brought up a new display showing communication patterns between the compromised technicians and unknown support personnel within the government's secure networks. "This level of access suggests coordination from someone with extraordinarily high security clearance," she continued, carefully monitoring Caldwell's reaction from her peripheral vision. His expression remained professionally neutral, but his right hand had moved to adjust his pen on the table, a small stress movement that Elena had predicted he would make when feeling threatened. "Do we have identification on these internal support personnel?" the National Security Advisor asked. "Yes, sir," Sophia replied. "That's the primary purpose of this briefing." She entered a special command sequence on her tablet, activating protocols that had been embedded in the presentation system earlier that day. Immediately, the room's electronic security measures engaged, isolating the chamber from external communications and activating enhanced recording systems that would document everything that followed. "What's happening?" the Secretary of State asked, noting the security protocols engaging around the room. "Security measures, Madam Secretary," Sophia explained calmly. "What I'm about to present requires the highest level of operational security." She brought up a new series of displays, Intricate patterns of data showing communication intercepts, financial transactions, personnel movements, and security authorizations spanning nearly 2 decades. For the past 8 years, a comprehensive investigation has documented the existence of a network operating within our intelligence and defense infrastructure, she stated, her voice clear and unwavering. This network has systematically created vulnerabilities in critical systems, engineered crisis points to test our response protocols, and positioned assets throughout our security apparatus. The room fell silent as the council members absorbed this extraordinary claim. Caldwell's expression remained composed, but Sophia noted the slight tensing of his jaw, another indicator Elena had prepared her to watch for. "That's a serious allegation, Lieutenant," the National Security Advisor said carefully. "What evidence supports it?" Sophia advanced to the next slide, showing a complex organizational chart with one name highlighted at its center, Robert Caldwell. For the first time, Caldwell's composure faltered. His eyes widened slightly before he regained control, his expression shifting to one of indignant disbelief. "This is absurd," he stated, his voice carrying just the right note of offended dignity. "I've served this country faithfully for over 30 years. "Yes, you have, Mr. Caldwell," came a new voice from the doorway, while simultaneously compromising its most sensitive security systems. Elena Reeves entered the chamber, her presence immediately commanding attention. The room's atmosphere transformed instantly, as council members recognized the legendary figure, whose return from presumed death had triggered high-level security protocols days earlier. Commander Reeves, the National Security Advisor, acknowledged, his expression grave. "I understand you're behind this investigation." "I am," Elena confirmed, moving to stand beside Sophia. "For the past 8 years, I've documented Mr. Caldwell's activities in meticulous detail, building a comprehensive case that has been independently verified through multiple channels." She nodded to Sophia, who brought up a new series of displays. Financial records showing payments through shell companies, communication intercepts revealing coded instructions to network operatives, and most damning of all, authorization codes used for emergency protocols that matched Caldwell's digital signature. 30 minutes ago, Elena continued, Mr. Caldwell authorized emergency security measures across multiple agencies in response to our capture of his field operatives. Those authorizations created a digital trail that connects directly to operations we've been monitoring for years. Caldwell's expression had transformed from indignation to cold calculation, the response of someone rapidly assessing options rather than protesting his innocence. "You disappeared 8 years ago, Commander," he noted, his voice steady despite the pressure. "Officially listed as killed in a training accident. Yet here you stand, making accusations based on evidence gathered while you were supposedly dead. Evidence that can't possibly meet admissibility standards in any legitimate proceeding." Elena smiled slightly, the confident expression of someone who had anticipated every counterargument long before this confrontation. "My operational status was classified at the highest levels following Operation Frostbite," she replied. "A necessary measure after I began uncovering your network's activities. And as for the evidence..." She turned to Director Montgomery, who nodded and activated her secure tablet. Immediately, the room's displays changed to show verification certificates from multiple intelligence agencies and the Department of Justice. "Every piece of evidence has been properly documented and authenticated through appropriate channels," Montgomery confirmed. "The investigation was conducted with full authorization under Executive Order 12,333, with oversight from both Congressional Intelligence Committees." The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, his expression hardening as he studied the evidence. "If these allegations are accurate, this represents the most significant counterintelligence failure in modern American history." "Not a failure, Mr. Secretary," Elena corrected. "A deliberate, systematic compromise, orchestrated by someone who understood our security protocols intimately because he helped design them." She turned her attention back to Caldwell, who had now fallen completely silent, his eyes constantly moving as he assessed possible escape routes, both literal and figurative. "For nearly 2 decades, you've positioned assets throughout our intelligence community," Elena stated. "Operation Frostbite was your first major success, a manufactured crisis that allowed you to test how effectively you could manipulate our emergency protocols. When I began asking questions about inconsistencies in the mission parameters, you arranged for my elimination." "A convenient narrative," Caldwell finally responded, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "But you'll find proving these allegations rather difficult, Commander." I've served under 5 presidents. My record speaks for itself. Yes, it does, Elena agreed. When properly decoded. She nodded to Sophia, who brought up a final display, a comprehensive timeline showing Caldwell's career progression alongside major security breaches and intelligence failures. The pattern was unmistakable once properly assembled, a career path that had positioned him at critical junctures during every significant compromise of American security systems. You were never the direct operative, Elena explained for the benefit of the council members. You were the enabler, the one who ensured investigations were misdirected, that security upgrades contained subtle vulnerabilities, that the right people were promoted or sidelined at critical moments. The National Security Advisor had risen to his feet, his expression grave as he assessed the overwhelming evidence. Security teams are standing by, Commander? Elena nodded. Yes, sir. Vetted personally by Director Montgomery. The advisor pressed a concealed button on the table, and within seconds, security personnel entered the chamber. Elite operators who moved with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to high-stakes interventions. Robert Caldwell, you're being detained pending formal charges of espionage, conspiracy against the United States and treason, the advisor stated formally. These proceedings are now classified at the highest level. As security personnel moved to escort Caldwell from the chamber, he locked eyes with Elena, his expression revealing the cold calculation of someone still assessing options. You've won this round, Commander, he said quietly. But the network is larger than you realize. This changes nothing. Elena met his gaze steadily. It changes everything, Robert. Your operational security protocols have been compromised for years. Every communication, every financial transaction, every asset you've positioned, all documented and ready for systematic dismantling. For the first time, genuine alarm flashed across Caldwell's features as he understood the full implications of her statement. She hadn't just been building a case against him personally. She had mapped his entire network, created a comprehensive blueprint that would allow intelligence agencies to dismantle everything he had spent decades constructing. As Caldwell was led from the chamber, the remaining council members turned their attention to Elena and Sophia, their expressions reflecting the extraordinary gravity of what had just transpired. The full extent of the compromise? The Secretary of Defense asked quietly. Is significant, but containable, Elena replied. We've identified 89 embedded assets across 17 agencies so far, with more likely to emerge as we trace Caldwell's connections. Remediation protocols have been prepared and can be implemented immediately. The National Security Advisor studied her with newfound respect. 8 years in the shadows, Commander. Most people would have given up or sought asylum elsewhere. Some missions transcend personal comfort, sir, Elena replied simply. The integrity of our national security infrastructure was at stake. There was no alternative but to see it through. As the council members dispersed to implement emergency response measures, Sophia found herself alone with Elena in the now empty chamber. The weight of what they had accomplished hung in the air between them, a conspiracy decades in the making, exposed and neutralized through one woman's unwavering commitment to truth. What happens now? Sophia asked quietly. Elena gazed out the window at the Washington Monument illuminated against the evening sky, a symbol of the enduring principles she had spent 8 years working to protect. Now comes the harder part, she replied. Rebuilding what was compromised, restoring trust in systems that have been vulnerable for years. It's less dramatic than exposing the conspiracy, but ultimately more important. She turned back to Sophia, her expression softening slightly. That's where officers like you become essential. You've seen firsthand how fragile these systems can be, how vigilance must be constant rather than convenient. For a moment, the legendary commander seemed to be looking beyond the immediate victory to a broader horizon of challenges that still remained. The greatest threats we face aren't always foreign powers or terrorist networks, she continued. Sometimes they're the slow erosion of vigilance, the gradual compromise of principles in the name of expediency. Fighting those threats requires a different kind of courage, the willingness to stand firm when others suggest compromise. The significance of Elena's words settled over Sophia like a mantle of responsibility. This hadn't just been an operation to expose a security breach. It had been a lesson in the unending vigilance required to preserve the institutions and principles that defined American democracy. 1 week later, they gathered in a secure conference room at the Pentagon. Director Montgomery had arranged a small private ceremony to officially acknowledge Elena's extraordinary service and the successful conclusion of what was now being called Operation Sentinel. Only those directly involved were present. No media, no publicity, no official records that could compromise the ongoing efforts to dismantle Caldwell's network. As Montgomery formally commended Elena's 8 years of solitary service, presenting her with a classified presidential commendation, Sophia observed the quiet discomfort in the commander's posture. The woman who had spent years in the shadows clearly found even this limited recognition unsettling. After the ceremony, as the small group began to disperse, Sophia approached Elena with a question that had been troubling her since their confrontation with Caldwell. "May I ask you something personal?" she requested. Elena nodded, adjusting her uniform with obvious unfamiliarity. After 8 years in civilian attire, military dress felt foreign despite her restored rank. "Why didn't you ever try to clear your name?" Sophia asked. "Even among those who had clearance to know the truth. You could have been vindicated years ago." Elena considered the question carefully, her gaze moving to the window where military helicopters could be seen departing the Pentagon landing pad. "Vindication was never the objective, Lieutenant," she replied quietly. "The mission was." "But 8 years of exile," Sophia pressed gently, "when you could have had support, resources, a team to help you." "The network had penetrated too deeply," Elena explained. "Any conventional investigation would have been compromised before it began. I needed complete operational independence, free from systems that could be monitored or manipulated." They walked together toward the airfield, where a military jet awaited. Elena had been assigned to lead a new task force dedicated to strengthening the security protocols that Caldwell's network had compromised. Sophia had been selected as part of her core team, an honor that represented extraordinary recognition for an officer of her rank. As they prepared to board the aircraft, Elena removed something from her pocket. It was the small fabric patch bearing the stylized Valkyrie insignia in midnight blue that she had shown Sophia during their first mission together. "You asked me once why I came back after 8 years, she said, offering the patch to Sophia. "The truth is simpler than you might expect. Some principles are worth any sacrifice, worth disappearing for 8 years, worth risking everything to defend." Sophia accepted the patch with quiet reverence, understanding the profound significance of the gesture. "I've studied your record extensively since we've been working together," she said. "There's nothing like it in our current operational doctrine." "The record doesn't matter," Elena replied, glancing back at the Pentagon, where new missions were already being planned. "The principles do. Always have." They boarded the aircraft, taking their positions for another flight into uncertain territory. As they prepared for takeoff, Sophia hesitated with one final question. "After all of this is truly finished, when Caldwell's entire network is dismantled, will you tell your story then? Will the world know what Shadow Valkyrie really accomplished?" Elena looked out at the horizon where storm clouds were gathering over the Virginia landscape. Her expression was thoughtful, tinged with something that might have been hope or resignation. "Some missions are never fully completed, Lieutenant," she said softly. "There will always be those who see our systems as vulnerabilities to be exploited, rather than principles to be defended. The work continues long after individual victories are won." She turned back to Sophia, her expression resolute, but not without warmth. "But perhaps someday, when the immediate threats have been contained, parts of the story can be told, not for recognition, but as a reminder of what can be accomplished through unwavering commitment to principle, even when standing completely alone." The engines roared to life, drowning out any further conversation. As the aircraft lifted into the turbulent sky, Elena Reeves, once erased from history, now returned to continue her life's work, allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Not for the vindication or the restoration of her name, but for the knowledge that the principles she had defended in isolation for 8 years would endure through officers like Sophia, individuals who understood that the most important battles were often fought by those whose names would never appear in official records. In the distance, the monuments of Washington stood resolute against the darkening sky, symbols of the democratic principles that had guided America through its most challenging moments. They had witnessed countless guardians come and go, some publicly celebrated, others operating in shadows so deep that history would never record their names. Shadow Valkyrie had emerged from those depths, not for recognition, but because the mission demanded it. And in a world where threats evolved constantly, such guardians remained essential, operating in the spaces between official acknowledgement and absolute necessity, ensuring that freedom's price was paid by those willing to sacrifice everything for its preservation. The story of Elena Reeves was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But the legacy she had established through 8 years of solitary vigilance would continue to shape American security for generations to come, not through official commendations or public recognition, but through the quiet commitment of those who understood that some principles were worth any sacrifice. As their aircraft disappeared into the clouds, carrying them toward new challenges that required the unique perspectives they had developed, both women understood a truth that few would ever fully grasp. The most consequential victories were often won by those who sought no recognition, guided only by unwavering commitment to principles that transcended personal comfort or acclaim. In that truth lay not just the story of Shadow Valkyrie, but the enduring strength of the nation she had returned to serve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.